Could you ever suspect your neighbor, friend, or family member of harboring sinister secrets? In this dark chronicle of deception and betrayal, we delve into the chilling case of the Birkman Murders, where one man's unthinkable double life paints an eerie picture of the human capacity for duplicity. Sometimes truth is scarier than fiction. Buckle up, because we'll pull back the curtains on the Birkman Murders. In 2017, a quiet Ohio community was at the heart of a chilling crime spree that shook the foundations of trust and safety. A tale of a predator lurking in plain sight, a man named George Brinkman. Imagine being betrayed by a friend, a confidant, someone you trust. That's what happened when George Brinkman, a seemingly ordinary man, turned on his friends in the most violent way imaginable. He killed 3 people: Suzanne Taylor and her 2 daughters, Taylor and Kylie Pfeiffer, all in the safety of their North Royalton home. 2 days later, he murdered a Stark County couple, Jean and Bobby John. How could anyone fathom such betrayal? What would drive a man to take the lives of those he called friends? But in an astonishing turn of events, after confessing to these heinous acts, Brinkman recanted. He claimed his innocence and alleged his confession was coerced by the police. Could it be true? Or was this a desperate attempt to escape the noose tightening around him? Suzanne's ex-boyfriend, Scott, was interviewed at great lengths by the police. He arrived and noticed that all the cars were parked in their usual spots, which was quite unsettling. None of the occupants were present, and he later discovered that Taylor, a skilled pitcher and softball coach, had missed an emergency practice due to her mother's involvement. Concerned, he approached the front door and called out Taylor's name, worried that her mother was preventing her from leaving. Strangely, there was no response, and even the dog Aries remained silent, which was unusual as they rarely took it anywhere. As he circled the house, he observed that all the blinds and windows were shut, adding to his unease. He decided to take action using his lockpick set. Surprisingly, the front door was easily opened, despite being deadbolted from the inside. The door was unlocked within seconds, and he cautiously entered the house. He used a screwdriver to open the sticky bedroom door. The room was silent, illuminated by the lights and the hum of the air conditioning. The bodies of Suzanne Taylor and her daughters were discovered on January 25, 2017. Each one was brutally stabbed. 2 days later, on January 27th, Jean and Bobby John were also found dead in their home, victims of the same violent end. Could these gruesome murders be the work of one man? What evidence pointed towards George Brinkman? While investigating the scene, another significant detail that should have caught Scott's attention was the peculiar placement of George's van. Instead of parking it in its usual spot near Taylor's car, George had positioned it curiously in front of the dining room window. This deviation from the norm raised intriguing questions. What motivated George to park in such an unusual location? Could there be a hidden meaning behind this change? Delving further into George's background, he was not just an acquaintance, but a childhood friend who had long held a crush on Taylor. In the act of compassion, Taylor had permitted George to seek shelter in his van by allowing him to stay at her house during winter. However, their once amicable relationship had downturned over the past few months. George's behavior had become increasingly distant and rude, causing Taylor considerable frustration. The situation grew so strained that Taylor even mentioned the possibility of George engaging in odd behaviors. What transpired to cause this deterioration in their relationship? The courtroom awaited the answers, as the trial of George Birkman aimed to shed light on the enigmatic circumstances surrounding the tragic events that shattered the lives of those involved. While Scott never saw any advances from George towards Taylor, he did observe their strained relationship. George seemed unhappy when Taylor started dating him, and he even blocked him on Facebook and created a new account. Although George had a history of making threats, he hadn't threatened Taylor as far as Scott knew. While he couldn't confirm any violent behavior, he felt that George had a propensity for violence based on his demeanor and threatening remarks. He also mentioned that George dropped out of high school in his senior year to join the military. It began with a phone call to George, during which he assured them he would come for an interview. However, George failed to show up as promised. The police eventually located him, leading to a 9-hour standoff with law enforcement. When questioned by the police, Birkman presented a facade of innocence, stating he was home on the nights of the murders and had no connection to these horrible crimes. Could a man with such an ordinary exterior carry such darkness inside him? Or were the authorities barking up the wrong tree? Despite Birkman's claims, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Police disclosed they had damning proof that placed him at the scene of the crimes. But was this enough to send a man to death row? Imagine being in a courtroom where the trial of George Birkman unfolded. It all started on March 5, 2018, in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas in Cleveland, Ohio. The prosecution, led by Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Timothy McGinty, aimed to prove that George Birkman was responsible for a heinous crime. Conversely, attorney Mark A. Mayers led the defense, fighting to prove George's innocence. Now let's dive into the intriguing details of the trial. The prosecution's case relied on the testimonies of various witnesses.
Present in court is defendant Mr. Birkman.
Police officers, forensic experts, and neighbors took the stand to share their accounts.
I am and forever will be Taylor and Kylie's dad.
They argued that George Birkman had strong motives to harm his family. Financial struggles and marital problems were pointed out as potential reasons for his actions.
Kylie was only 18 years old and a freshman at Bowling Green State University.
The prosecution also emphasized that George Birkman had the perfect opportunity to commit the murders since he was the only one present at home when the tragic events occurred. However, the defense had a different story to tell. They argued vehemently that George Birkman was innocent and had been set up as a scapegoat for the crimes. They presented witnesses, including George Birkman's friends and family, to support their claims.
With all due respect, reconsider your sentence.
The defense also questioned the lack of physical evidence directly linking George Birkman to the murders. After 2 intense weeks of presenting evidence, the jury reached their decision. They found George Birkman guilty of 3 counts of aggravated murder, a chilling outcome that shook the courtroom. As a result, George Birkman received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision left many lingering questions about what transpired on that fateful day. George Birkman didn't accept defeat easily. He appealed his conviction, hoping for a chance at freedom. However, his appeal was denied by the Ohio Court of Appeals in 2019. To this day, George Birkman remains behind bars, serving his sentence at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Youngstown, Ohio. This chilling saga reveals a stark truth about the human capacity for deception and brutality. The tale of George Birkman forces us to question how well we know those around us. What secrets might they be hiding? What might they be capable of? How can trust ever be restored in the face of such betrayal? As we remember the victims of this horrifying spree, we must ask ourselves, how can we prevent such tragedies in the future? Until then, stay safe. And remember, things aren't always as they seem.